Greetings and welcome to our last session of our series of character studies. And of course, we'll be examining Esther, the classical story, the beautiful story, one that a lot of people know and that is dear to a lot of people. And so, as all things should be started, let us start with prayer. Lord, we thank you that you have allowed us to have these sessions of character studies, that we have been able and had the opportunity to examine the lives of people from the Bible, both men and women. We thank you for the blessings that you provided. And Lord, I ask that you send me the right words that you wish people to hear about Esther. May you be glorified through this, and may we see you through this story. In Jesus' name, amen. So, you may ask, why Esther? Well, it's number one, she's my niece's favorite Bible character. She is, the woman who went from rags to riches, who was a nobody who became queen. She is a hero within the Bible. And it's also a very classic story. It has an antagonist, it has, the bad guy, that has, the heroes, the heroine. You have a nice climax, a nice build up. It has the elements of a literary story. It's short and it's perfect for movies, plays, musicals, all of that. It has everything in it. It's a familiar narrative, and so it still, when I was rereading it and examining it, I found a lot of things that I didn't notice before, a lot of interesting details, and what you can call spiritual golden nuggets. And that's what I'm going to try to focus on. Yes, I'll be telling the story, but I'll be pointing out details I thought were interesting. And so, with that, we get into the introduction. So, in the introduction, we have it set up during the reign of the Medes and Persians. In our last session, we looked at Jerusalem was conquered by Babylon, and so those were the Chaldeans. That was Nebuchadnezzar. After Nebuchadnezzar died, his children got to power, and then his children were conquered by a man named Cyrus. He was a Mede, but what he did is his empire was one where he had a partnership with Persians, and so he had within his official court, you can say his cabinet, he had Medes and Persians of equal rank, and so you couldn't really divide it that much. You couldn't really say it was just a Mede empire or that it was just a Persian empire. There was a moment where it was a Medo-Persian, where it was mixed. So he had several kings where that was the case. And several lines down. So you had Cyrus, and within this period of 70 years of after Israel, after Jerusalem is conquered by Babylon, till a bit later on, you have several kings. And in a way, you kind of had like co-regents in a way, several rulers. So right now we're at a moment where you have the king's name here is Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus. That's the Hebrew name. We know him more as Xerxes. There were several kings called Xerxes. Right after him, there's also Artaxerxes. This person can also be addressed as Artaxerxes. So it's Artaxerxes was more of like a title name. But anyway, it's during this moment when Israel is and the Jews, They are dispersed all throughout. And you had the Jews living in Persia, living in Babylon. And so you had this king, Ahasuerus, who he came to the throne. He's the most powerful man in the world at that time. And in the beginning of his reign, he's holding a big feast and I mean, this feast lasts half a year. Imagine that. A party that lasts half a year. That's 180 days, 6 months. So he's having a party with his 7 princes. And they're living it up. They're enjoying it. And while he's having his feast, his queen, his wife, Vashti, is having her own feast, her own party with for women in the palace. And so on the 7th day of this party, while the king is happy, he's having a good time, he decides, let me call my wife and let her come and entertain us. Well, his wife decided not to come, Vashti. She was having her own party, and so the king wanted her to drop her party, send the guests home, come over to the king's party, and start entertaining people. Vashti refused. She didn't want to. This was an insult, and now you have the emperor and the 7 princes. You can say the 7 governors or the 7 kings underneath the emperor. And the king starts wondering, what is, according to the law, what should we do in this kind of situation? What should we do to the queen? And the reason I have this guy's name bolded, Memucan, he is one of the princes, and that's because he gives some advice. Memucan said, well, what Vashti did was wrong. I mean, disobeying the king. And it's not just an offense against the king, but it's also an offense against all the officials and all the people who are in your domain, O king. And that's because he says what she did, because she is a queen, because of her title, because of her position, she's a role model. And if the queen disobeys without punishment, what's going to happen? Memucan is saying, what's going to happen to our wives? What's going to happen to all the wives within the kingdom? They're going to take precedent. Well, if the queen said no to the emperor, that means we could too. Memucan is worried. And he said, we cannot let this go unpunished. We need to do something about it. She has to be punished. And so, what was the recommendation? Was that they said, you know what? Let us make a law within the Mede and Persians that we take Vashti away from her position as queen and put someone else in. She can't fulfill her role as queen. Let's get rid of her and put someone else. So the king said, you know what? That's a nice idea. Let's do that. And so it was decreed. And so what he did was that at first, he didn't do it immediately. The party ended. The king's anger it went down. You say on the 7th day this happened. 6 months of partying. After he was done partying, after things quieted down, the king remembered what the queen did, and he removed her from her post. It's possible that he also removed her during the party days, like right after the seventh. But he he made a command, and he appointed people, officers within the provinces, that they go around and they find beautiful women. That they find virgins in particular, women who are not yet married. I mean, it's the queen, the king did have some dignity. He didn't go around taking other people's wives. No. But any woman who was single, who hadn't been married at all, notice widows are not included. So this is just women who have never been married and who are still virgins. So he had officers kind of like scouting, going around, collecting these young women. And they were put into the custody of, you could say, in this big castle, in charge of a eunuch by the name of Haggai. We're going to come across him a bit later on, perhaps. And so they said, and these officers were supposed to look around and see whichever one they thought was fitting. So these officers were, we could say, the first test, the first interview. They would meet with them, see how they are, and then out of the women that they would collect, they would then move them on to the next audition. So they passed this audition if they did, and then they would go to the next audition and to the king. And so here we meet now our heroine. Here we meet Esther. And within this story, Esther is just a Jew. She is living with a person named Mordecai. Now, Mordecai and Esther, they're both of the tribe of Benjamin. It's a small tribe. It was just below Judah. Now, what's significant about this is that when Israel was split into two, you had 10 tribes in the north and 2 tribes in the south. And the 2 tribes in the south, you had Judah, which is where Jerusalem was. And below that, you had the tribe of Benjamin. So these 2 tribes, they had some more of the godly kings, but also the top 10 tribes, those in the north, they first got conquered by the Assyrian Empire, and then the Babylonian Empire conquered them. So these were directly brought from Jerusalem to this area here. And it's a small tribe. Notice it's not the king's tribe. It's some other small one. People who were thought, they were nobody. But what we see from here is that Mordecai, he wasn't Esther's uncle. He wasn't her father. He was a cousin. Esther was the daughter of his uncle. So these two people, they're not, I would say, maybe there's a slight difference of age. Mordecai probably was older, but he took on this father role. I imagine him being, it's usually when we think of Mordecai, we imagine him someone with like a big gray beard, someone who's old enough to be her grandfather, or someone who's old enough to be her dad. However, with being cousins, it's possible he was only just a few years older. But them being just the two of them, with her father and her mother dying when she was very young. Possibly they died during the captivity. We don't know. But just the two of them. So they lived together, took care of each other. And Mordecai, he was like, he took on the role of the father. Now, Esther is not her Hebrew name. Her Hebrew name was Hadassah. Or in some translations, you would read Gadassa or Gadessa. That's that's a Hebrew name. Hadassah. Gadasa. Esther, it's more of a it's more of like a Greek type of name. And so he told her she went by the name Esther. And she was taken, and Mordecai told her, do not tell her that you are a Jew. Keep it a secret of who you are. And she was taken to the citadel, the castle, where Haggai was, and she passed the first audition. She was pleasing to him. She acted more or less decently. She knew how to hold herself. And God had blessed her with a beautiful figure. And from that big audition, 7 women were chosen from that castle to go and spend time with a king. And so, again, Esther, she did not reveal who she was. They don't know she's a Jew. And Mordecai, she did not let her connections with Mordecai be known. But what is interesting is that we read that Mordecai, he's always in the front of the court. So in the place where Esther was, Mordecai worked his way to always be around that area. Of course, he's worried about her. He cares about her. So he's trying to figure out, how is she doing today? Did she pass the condition? What did people think about her? What is the news? And he's trying to hear the gossip. He's caring about, of course, he cares about her. He loves her. And so the women undergo preparations. And the preparations that they embark on, to me, these preparations are insane. But then again, this is the guy who had a party for 6 months nonstop. So the preparations, you had 6 months of being bathed in myrrh. Myrrh is a pleasant perfume. So imagine constantly having these baths and constantly putting on oils for 6 months of a certain fragrance. That fragrance is going to seep into your skin. It's going to be strong, and of course, you're going to be smelling so good. If we put on just a little bit of cologne and that lasts for a while, imagine 6 months of bathing in, you can say, cologne and perfumes. And then you had 6 months of other spices and ointments. So 1 year of preparation. And it was where the king would spend one day or a certain moment with each candidate. So she would go into the morning, or like she would go in the evening. So they had one night with him, one night to make an impression. So they go in the morning, they'll go back. And if the king wanted another day with her, another night with her, or some more time, then she would be summoned. That's if he found her appealing. Now it's more of a type of thing was, if she left an impression and he wanted to to know her some more, he would invite her again. Now what they did during that night, or during those nights, I do not know. I'm just going to assume that the king was someone of respect and dignity, and that perhaps they slept in separate beds. That's what I'm just going to hope for and imagine, but the story does not tell us. Now, here we encounter the name of one of the parents of Esther. And I believe this is her father, Abihail. Just an interesting mention. I never Notice that before, that it says her father's name, but her father's name is Abihail. And when it was time for her, she went in, and it was a custom to where the eunuchs let the women take whatever they wanted. So they let the woman bring whatever she wanted to help her make an impression with the king. Now I imagine jewelry and flowers and gold and and musical instruments, whatever they desired, they were allowed to take with them to try to to help them out with the impression. Now, when it was Esther's turn, she did something wise. Instead of just going around, she asked the person in charge, Haggai, what he recommends that she takes. And she only took what Haggai recommended, nothing more. And so she went in, and all of the people in charge, notice she won their favor as well. So at first, all the people, all of those in charge of the operation, they liked Esther. She knew how to work with people. God had blessed her with that. And she made a good impression first on the lower people. So if she made a good impression on them, they're going to want her to win. They're going to want her to get the position. And they're going to try to make her better. It's similar to if you're going for a job interview and there are people already in the company that you have gone on good terms with. And it gets to a point, they want you to be in the company. They're going to try to help you out. They're going to try to reach out to HR. And they're the ones who might bring you into the HR department, bring you in to work one day, and so forth, to give you an edge. And that's what these gentlemen here are doing. They're trying to give Esther an edge, try to help her out. And of course, Esther, she made an impression. She definitely made an impression. And so she got to meet with him in the 7th year of his reign. Now, if you remember, we start our story in the 3rd year of his reign. So 4 years later, Esther gets chosen as queen. So 4 years after the whole Vashti incident, they were scouting, they were testing for 3 years. And then you had the 1 year of preparation. And finally she is chosen, and she is made queen. And there's a big feast. The king decreases taxes. It is nice. Things are beautiful. And then a few verses down, we read the second time when the king was gathering women. So in other words, Esther won the competition. She got the job. The king decided to open a second competition. I guess he liked what was going on so much that he wanted not just one wife to replace Vashti, he wanted at least 2. And so during the second phase of gathering women and having these auditions, that it happened that Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Now this tells us, because he's sitting at the king's gate, likely he was some kind of official, or he was someone who he had some kind of role within the politics. because generally at the gates were positions where people would go to hear the news of what was going on politically, but also it's where the interactions with the common folk would happen. Because not just anybody can go and see the king. There would be these meeting places where people go present their issues, and they would try to settle them there. That usually happened at the gates, and so Mordecai constantly was there, and he told her that, do not let them know that I am a relative of you. They know I'm a Jew. They don't know that you are, so keep it hidden. They were not a very favored people group in some circles, even though there were some Jews who had risen to be of dignity and respectable status. Daniel was one of those, but Daniel is he's a bit later on. And so, or it could be that Daniel's in a different province. But continuing, it came to be that as Mordecai happened to be sitting by one of the gates, God orchestrated it to where two of the servants of the emperor Ahasuerus or Artaxerxes, they wanted to assassinate him. And Mordecai, he got ear of it. He happened to hear what was going on. Now we don't know whether he heard him themselves or whether other people found out about it and told Mordecai. Remember, Mordecai is someone, he has some kind of position. So people brought it up to Mordecai. And Mordecai then, what he did is he went and he told Esther. Now, how he told Esther, it seems like he told her directly. He somehow was able to contact her. He let her know. And then Esther, what she did is she didn't just tell the king, hey, these people are trying to kill you. She says it in the name of Mordecai. And this plays an important role. So she lets the king know, the emperor, these people are trying. I heard word from this guy named Mordecai, who's at the gates, that these people are trying to kill you. They investigated it. They found the evidence. They took care of the matter, and it was recorded in, you can say, the records of the king, that a guy named Mordecai heard. He found word of it, and he made it happen so that the king's life was spared. And this, in the name of Mordecai, is important. We'll get to a bit later on. And as every good story has, there's a conflict or an antagonist. And here we are introduced to the bad guy of the story, so you can say. And his name is Haman, the Agagite. What an Agagite is, I do not know. However, Josephus, the first century historian, he was a Jewish historian, and he calls Haman an Amalekite. And he says this in his book called Antiquity of the Jews. That's in the 11th chapter, or you can say his 11th book, 6th chapter, 5th paragraph. And so I have the excerpt from his book at the bottom of the slide, saying that by birth he was an Amalekite. What is an Amalekite? An Amalekite, they were a people group where we're introduced to them during the time of Moses. That when the Jews were crossing over into the promised land, when they were wandering the 40 years, the Amalekites, instead of coming out and, you can say, having straight war against them, what they would do is they would follow them from a distance, and they would do sneak attacks, guerrilla warfare. They would do a surprise attack, hit some people in the back, and then run away. And then again, as they're traveling as a multitude, you had about 1 million people wandering the desert. Those who were a bit straggling behind, or those toward the end, they would run up, do a surprise attack, kill some people in the back, and then run away. They were very wicked and very cruel. And they became like an arch enemy of the Jews. So you had that incident. Moses then later he made an attack against them. Then again, it was during the time of Saul. God commanded Saul, these guys are going to cause a lot of trouble. I remember what they did in the past. Wipe them out. But he didn't wipe all of them out. He left, the king, some of the royal people alive. Just, it's thought maybe he'd get some favor. And so a bit later down the road, a few years later, these Amalekites attack on King David, take everyone who was there captive, and rush away. So they had a lot of conflict with the Jews, arch enemies. And here you have a descendant who's now an Amalekite rising to the story. And of course, he's going to cause some conflict. Did he create conflict with them purposefully? At this stage, not yet. But we'll get to that. Now, this Haman, he started rising above all the other officials. He got into politics and he started rising up quickly. He started gaining power. And the king saw this person has potential. This person is good at what he does. So he started rising him up in advisors. And of course, that's how it is. Those who are good at their job, you want to give them more. Now, as for quickly going back to Haman being an Amalekite, Josephus is the only source I've been able to find that calls him an Amalekite. Whether he actually is or not too sure. But we'll go with Josephus in this case. And so he's rising up, and he got to such a status to where when he was walking through the king's gate, so he wasn't just at the king's gate, he got to enter in, he got to go through. He's someone who's now before the king. When he would walk by, people would show their respect and bow down. A bow of respect, paying homage to him, paying respect to him. Because the king had commanded, this person has received status, he deserves respect. Now, among those who were the king's servants, out of those who were serving at the king's gate, out of the politicians, there was one person who did not bow, and that was Mordecai. And it's Haman, he doesn't notice Mordecai. He would just walk in very pridefully, go through the gate. But these servants would ask Mordecai, why are you breaking the king's command? He told us, go in, and he told us to bow down and pay respect to this guy. Now, Mordecai is a Jew, and he told them, I'm not going to bow down. I only show that level of respect to God alone. He's a God-fearing Jew. And he said the reason why he doesn't bow down is because he is a Jew. And so these servants now, I guess you can call them like officials at the king's gate, they told Haman, there is this guy, a Jew, who's not bowing down to you, out of those who are at the gate, out of the officials. And he's not bowing down to you because he's a Jew. Now, Haman, he wanted to test this out. Now he knows, wait, there's someone not paying respect. So next time he's walking through the gate, he looks, is there a guy who's not bowing down to me? And he sees that Mordecai, this one guy, is not bowing down. He's not paying respect. And he's filled with anger. How could it be? Now, and he thought, all right, his reason for not bowing down to me is that he's a Jew. That means all Jews will not bow down to me. And he began to disdain. He said, I don't just want to punish Mordecai alone. I want to get punished all those and get rid of all those who will not bow down to me, because that is who they are. You can say it's like it's in their blood. We would use that idiom. And he thought, let's get rid of all the Jews, because he thought all the Jews won't bow down to me. If Mordecai isn't bowing down to me because he's a Jew, then all the Jews would not bow. And so he made the decision. He needs to come up with a plan to get rid of all the Jews. Now remember, Esther's a Jew, but no one knows that she is one. And so he starts devising the plan. He starts carrying things out. And he's casting lots. He's rolling dice to find out, all right, so we need to get rid of them. The question is when. And the dice falls onto the 12th month. He thought, all right, the 12th month, that's the month of Adar. We got it. We have the time. Now we just need to present it. Present it in a way so that the king would like it. So Haman, he comes up to the emperor and he says, Emperor, there is a certain people that is scattered abroad and dispersed among all the provinces of your kingdom. They're not just in one location. Otherwise, we could just go and attack, kill off the people in that location. There you go. But no, these people are scattered all throughout the kingdom. Now, their laws are so different that the essence of their cultural laws are keeping them from obeying the king's laws. So it's because of who they are, their culture, the laws that they have amongst themselves, their common law is so contrary to the king's law that they're always in rebellion. Now, who wants rebellion? No one. And so the king says, Haman tells him, it's not profitable to keep these guys alive. We need to get rid of this people group. Otherwise, it might encourage the others to do likewise. That play worked with Vashti. Remember, she's going to set an example. So same here. These people, it might become a bigger problem. And he also adds, and just to, because I know it might take some resources to make this happen, I'm going to pay more than what is required. More than what I think it would take. 10,000 talents of silver. Now, in those days, 1 talent is about one day's wage. So he's saying 10,000 payments or 10,000 days of work. I'm going to pay that into the treasury to help make this happen. Now, remember, Haman has good connections with the emperor. So the emperor, he takes off his seal and says, go and do as you wish. This enemy. But notice, actually, he doesn't notice that they're the Jews. He doesn't specify which people group. And here he's being lofty. He says, there's this group, but he doesn't mention what. A king, he trusts Naaman, he doesn't care. He says, oh, these guys, I don't know who they are. I don't know who it would be. Go ahead and get rid of them. Sure. And so he gives it to him. And Haman here is labeled as the enemy of the Jews. And the king also says, you don't need to pay me. You don't need to put the money into the treasury. I'm going to supply the money. Do whatever seems good to you. And so they made an edict. They made a command to be sent throughout all the nations that on the 13th day of the 12th month, that there's going to be a decree where the Jews are going to get annihilated. A day of destruction for all of the Jews. So they sat down after they made the decree. It went out in Susa, the citadel, that's the castle, and all throughout the lands. The king and Haman, they rejoiced, they were drinking, they were having a good time. But notice, but the entire city was in confusion. This ethnic group is going to get destroyed. What? These Jews, they were not in conflict with the people there. They were not starting this rebellion. They were not an evil people group. They just showed disrespect to Haman. And everyone, there was this confusion. Why? What? The news reaches Mordecai. He reads it and he mourns the way that they did back in those days. So back then, when you wanted to publicly show sadness, you wore ripped clothes. So they would literally rip their clothes. They would put on sackcloth, which was this clothing of sadness or mourning. You only wore it when you wanted to show I'm not having a good day. It's something you wore. It was like funeral attire. And you would also put either dust or dirt or ashes upon your head. And this was publicly showing I am in a state of sadness. Nowadays, we try to hide it. But back then, it was normal. If you're in a state of sadness, it's okay to show it. And this was one of the ways to publicly show it. And he wasn't just hiding. People knew he was a Jew. They saw this edict. And he didn't hide away. He went in the midst of the city. He walked around in the middle of the city, ripped clothes, funeral attire, and ash upon his head. They saw Mordecai sad. It hit him. And on top of that, he did his work, being say, a politician, being an official at the king's gate while being in the funeral attire. Now and they didn't let him enter into the actual workplace though. He had to be outside the workplace. Because they had a law. If you are in funeral attire, you can't enter in. Now Mordecai, he wanted to keep letting people know, this is not okay with me. I recognize what's happening. I'm sad about it. Here I am. This is my reaction to it. And so he did his service outside of his work area. But people were still able to see. And of course, he fasted, he wept, and not just him, but all the Jews, their reaction. Fasting meaning they specifically weren't eating and asking God for help. They were weeping, lamenting. It wasn't just tears. You can imagine wailing, audibly crying. And they also took Mordecai's example. Now, one of the people who worked with Esther, who took care of her, they told her about they told her about Esther. They told Esther about Mordecai. And Mordecai, she wanted to try to cheer Mordecai up a bit. She sent him some clothes, something so that he can look better, to try to cheer him up. He did not want to. And then so Esther finds out he didn't accept it. What's going on? Esther is secluded from what's going on in the rest of the world. And so she called for Hathach. This is one of the eunuchs who he was a servant for her. And she ordered him, okay, I heard about Mordecai. Why is he acting like this? Can you go and find out the reason? So Hathach went out to Mordecai, who was in the open city. He was right there in front of the king's gate, outside his workplace. And Mordecai not only told Hathach everything that happened and the money that Haman gave. So Haman did actually give the money into the treasury, or that he promised to pay. And he not only did that, but he gave a copy of the decree to Hathach so that Esther can read it herself. Now, Esther and Mordecai, their positions there's a difference in between them. It's not, Mordecai is not in a position politically to where he can go and see the king. He doesn't have that availability. And so here through messengers, they have this dialogue. Often within stories, we hear that Esther meets up with Mordecai somehow. But here, no, they speak through Hathach. And so you have this dialogue. And Esther then tells Hathach to tell Mordecai that all the king's servants, and it's anyone who goes before the king uninvited, they could get killed. It's a death sentence. It makes sense why people had to go through these officials at the gates. You make your request known first to these lower people, and then it works its way up, and then it can go to the king. So the king is like the superior court. Things don't just go to the superior court. It first starts locally, then it goes to the court of appeal, it goes to the superior court of a state, and then it can raise up. Similarly, people couldn't just come to the king. They had to receive an invitation, or the king had to let him come. And Esther is telling Mordecai, I have no way of getting an invitation to the king. In order to see him on this matter, I'm going to have to just come in uninvited. And soldiers are going to have their swords ready to cut off my head, to kill me. They're going to look at the king. If he says, okay, you may approach, then they were allowed to come up forward. If not, they're dead on the spot. It's a good way to get rid of assassins. And so she says, but I'm going to try it. I haven't been called in a month. I don't know what to do. So Mordecai then, he sends a reply to Esther. And he says, Esther, where you're at, you're probably safe. No one knows that you're a Jew. But even though no one knows, don't think that you're safe from this. It will reach you too. And if you keep silent, right now you're in a position where you could help. And if you don't, God will send salvation from some other place. And you, because you didn't take action, you'll die. And who knows? Perhaps this is the reason why God put you in the place where you are currently. This verse is one that's beloved by many. And it's true, it applies to many of us. Who knows? Maybe we are in the position where we are at our works, in our churches, in the various settings where we are. Perhaps God put us in there so that we can be of assistance to talk to a certain person, to take a certain action at a certain moment. Perhaps. And so Mordecai is telling Esther through these messengers, perhaps this is why God placed you in the position of a king. So this encouraged Esther. She said, all right, gather all the Jews, pray for me, fast for me, meaning don't eat and pray earnestly, and fast and pray for 3 days and 3 nights. And I'll go. I'm going to risk my life, put my neck on the line. I'm going to try it. And if I die, I die. So Mordecai went, and he did everything that Esther told her to do. And here we have the rising tension. So on the 3rd day, after the whole fasting, she put on royal clothes, nice clothes, dresses up nicely, and she walks in. She's there in the inner court. She's there. The king sees her. She's uninvited. Everyone sees the queen just came in. Is she gonna die? I imagine silence. They're looking at her. They're looking at the king. Soldiers are getting their swords ready. Now, remember that Esther, she was able to build a good connection with the king, with Ahasuerus, Artaxerxes. And so he seen her was, even though she broke the law, he says, you know what, let me hear her out. All right, Esther, I like you. I'm imagining at that moment, the moment she saw the scepter, probably a nice, big, deep exhale. Whew. First hurdle carried is dealt with. And he said, my queen, why did you come? What is your request? I like you so much, I'm willing to give you half my kingdom. That's probably relief. But she decides to butter him up a little bit. Because just saying the request in front of everyone, it might backfire. So she wants to butter him up. And she says, well, if it's pleasing to you, I want you to come to my feast. I want to make a party for you and Haman alone. She wants to have an audience alone. Just the two of them. And so they both came. They ate to their desire, drank wine. And the king knows this was not, she didn't just risk her life to come just to invite him to a party. That sounds insane. There has to be some underlying reason. So he says, Esther, what do you want? Let me know and I'll fulfill it. Even if you want half the kingdom under your rule, I'm willing to give it to you, Esther. Now, it is believed why he says half the kingdom is because at that time, it's possible that he was splitting the kingdom up. That at this moment, you had Medes serving and you had Persians serving. Ahasuerus was from the Persian side. And so it's possible that he says, I can only give you from what I have. Esther, you want to rule with me? I'll give it to you. And so, but she says, instead of taking the request at that moment, she decides, let me try to butter him up one more time. Not here. So she says, if it's pleasant for you, come one more time. Just you and Haman. Haman, this puts him in a very good mood. He's happy, he's joyful. He got alone to a party. Just him and the queen. And he's saying there was nobody else. This lifts him up definitely above all the one, even above all the princes. And I imagine him just singing, happy, beaming, and then he runs into Mordecai. He sees Mordecai, and all that joy gets turned into hatred. He gets angry. Mordecai, the man who doesn't respect him, who doesn't bow down, who doesn't even stand up when Haman is walking by. And of course, Mordecai won't, especially after what Haman did. But Mordecai is not afraid of him. Haman was able to do that. He's probably can do a lot worse too. But Mordecai stands his ground. And Haman is filled with wrath. This is, you can say, escalated anger. So you get angry, and then there's wrath, which is like very high wrath, or like very high anger. And he goes and but nevertheless, he's like, you know what? I had a good evening. Let's not let let's not let Mordecai ruin it. So he comes home. He tries not to ruin anything. He tries to have a good time. And so he calls his wife. Her name is Zeresh. He calls his friends, and he starts telling about his riches. Starts talking about his sons and all the proclamations and things that the king's doing to honor him, and how the king advanced him. So he's just boasting about himself. He's having a pride extravaganza. This is about me. Everyone, hear about me. Hear what the king is doing for me. Very egotistical. And if you ever had to deal with egotistical people, you know that they often are the biggest jerks. In this case, you had a very talented jerk. And so Haman he goes on even telling them, and guess what? To top it all off, Esther, the queen, invited only me to a party with the king alone. And he says, but all of this, he tells him, this means nothing to me. Everything that I have, all my accomplishments, all my pride and my boasting, as long as Mordecai is alive, and as long as he is sitting in his position, I can't be happy. Sad, of course. That, of course, it's when a person gets to that kind of position, to where no matter what they have, they cannot be happy or satisfied because of what someone else thinks about them. Sometimes you run into people who treat social media that way. And it's sad. Someone gives a dislike or says a bad comment, and it's the end of the world. For Haman, one person not liking him was the end of the world for him. All the blessings that he had, all the goodness. I mean, he just spent a long while explaining to everyone how awesome things is, how life things are. And then he says, but all that good life, I can't enjoy it as long as this guy can't treat me with respect. May God protect us from being like that. May we know how to take an insult, and may we be okay with people not liking us. And they tell him, you know what? If this is the case, get rid of him. If you can't be happy with Mordecai around, get rid of Mordecai. So they built a gallows. It's a place to hang people. And they put it 50 cubits high. one cubit is about the span from here to here. It's like like an elbow, which roughly a little bit over than a foot, I'll say, or maybe even 1 foot, but roughly around there. So you're looking at this gallows that's over 50 feet high. He didn't just want to kill Mordecai. I mean, generally when you see or hear of gallows, they're what? It's 10 feet high, 12 feet high. This was almost like a 5-story building, a skyscraper to hang one person on it. He wanted to make a public spectacle of Mordecai. To say, if you disrespect me, this is what's going to happen to you. And they told him, all right, let's build it. And then you're going to, in the morning, you're going to tell the king to hang him on it. And then you can go have a good meal with the king. And he thought, you know what, this is nice. I like this idea. Let me build it. Now, notice, he builds this pretty quickly. Now, it just so happened that night came. And this king, he apparently wanted to fall asleep early, just by the layout of events. He wanted to sleep, and he couldn't sleep. And like many of us, when we can't sleep, sometimes we like to turn on something that it's in the background and we can fall asleep to. Some people turn on, a monotone reading of Leviticus or something like that, something dry. And he says, go read me the records. That way, maybe I can fall asleep to it. And he's laying there. And as they're reading it, they come to Mordecai saving the king from the assassination. And Ahasuerus, the emperor, he's laying there. He hears this and he says, wait, did we ever thank Mordecai? Did we ever give him a reward for what he did? And the people reading are looking through the records and they're saying, no. It was in his name that that the assassination stopped, but no, nothing happened. And as he was laying there, he asked, okay, well, we should do something then. What attendant is nearby? Which one of my advisors is currently in the court? He wanted to deal with this issue. To him, this was a problem. I need to deal with it. So he says, "But what advisor is around?" And they say, "Oh, well, actually, Haman's actually here." Now, Haman, he came in because he wanted to speak with the emperor about Mordecai. He wanted to get permission. Because you can't just go and kill off someone. And of course, he knew if he asks, what is this one lowly official guy? Of course he's going to say, go for it. And so he came to speak about Mordecai. He wants to kill Mordecai off. And he invites Haman. And the king says, as he comes in, he asks Haman, Haman, what should be done to a person whom the king wants to honor? And of course, Haman is thinking, honor? Who would the king want to honor more than me? I mean, well, And he starts thinking about himself, imagining things about himself. And says, well, if the king wants to honor someone, he should take the clothes which the king wears in public and let the person wear those clothes so that people can see and say, oh, wait, those are the king's clothes. The person's wearing them. And take the king's horse and put the person on that horse. And let that person wear the crown. And then give that over to the most noble officials. So take the attendants that are before the king, and those attendants will dress the guy in those clothes and everything, and the crown and the horse, and will lead that person through the city, shouting with a loud voice, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king wants to honor. And Ahasuerus, he hears this and says, I like that. All right, hurry. You are the noble official. Take the robes, take the horse, take the crown, and put it on Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Just imagine Mordecai, just imagine Haman's face. The guy who he hates with all his guts. The guy who he came to kill. He now has to honor. So Haman now needs to put the robes of the king onto Mordecai. He now has to put the crown, the king's crown, on Mordecai. And Haman now has to be the guy leading Mordecai on a horse, proclaiming, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. The man who showed no respect to Haman, Haman now needs to show him respect. And I just imagine the look on the faces of the other officials who knew what was going on. And I also imagine the confusion. Mordecai, the Jew. Jews are the people who are going to get exterminated. And now one of them is being praised. Things thicken. And so afterward, now I imagine this happening during the evening. It doesn't tell us that it was the next day or next anything. I imagine it's by going by the layout. He was doing this during the evening where there wasn't a lot of noise. Usually things are quiet toward the evening. So I'm sure everyone heard. Everyone peeked out. And afterward, Mordecai went back to his ordinary life. As for Haman, he rushed back to his house. He is mourning. He is in great sadness. I imagine him kicking and screaming. His head is covered. And his wife, of course, she heard, and his friends heard. And they all come to Haman and they say, this Mordecai, you are beginning to fall before him. It's, in other words, this guy is becoming your ruin. He's going to ruin you. And this guy, he's of the Jewish people. You will not be able to overcome him. They're telling him, you are in now, Haman, you're fighting a losing battle. This might end very badly for you. Now, as they were talking, remember, Esther invited to an evening party. Haman gets invited. The servants come to take Haman to the party. So they come, and this was the second day. They're eating, they're drinking, and the king says, all right, we've been going through this already. What do you wish? And here we get to the big climax. She now unfolds her request to the king and says, if I have found favor in your sight, please, O king, let my life be granted for my wish and my people. She says, if I found favor, my request is that you let me live. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. She says, my people, whom I am a part of, we're condemned to death. And if we would have just been slaves, like forced into servitude, I would have kept quiet. But we're here to be destroyed. And the emperor was like, wait, what? Now remember, Haman didn't tell him that he wants to destroy the Jews. He just says there's a people group. And so he says, who's causing this? The king is thinking, I didn't order any kind of destruction. So who is it? Who is this guy who's trying to kill you? You're my queen. Who would dare to try to kill my queen? Who would dare to try to kill you? And she says, a foe and an enemy. That guy, the wicked Haman. Haman probably, as soon as she pointed at him, he probably connected the dots. We're told he was terrified, probably petrified. He was likely, he had never been scared more than at this moment. And the king, in his wrath, was like, what? Haman's trying to kill you? So he rises up in anger and he walks away. He exits the room. So in the room now, it's just Esther and Haman. And Haman starts begging Esther for his life. Because he knows, he saw the king in his position, the way he is, he's going to try to punish me. It's something bad is coming his way. If the king reacted angrily to what you said, something bad's coming. And so he says, please let me live. And so it says he fell on the couch where Esther was. So Esther is sitting. He is falling on top of her, clinging onto her clothes, I imagine, or clinging onto her. Now imagine this picture though. The king exits. He's angry at Haman. And then he comes in, and Haman now is laying on top of Esther, holding onto her, holding tightly onto her clothes. What's the first thing that's going to come to mind? The first thing that came to the mind of the king was, he's trying to assault her. He's either trying to harm her or to rape her or to do something, and he's doing that in my house. That was the tipping point. As soon as the king said this, the king's servants ran in. They covered the king's they covered Haman's face with something and took him away. And one of the eunuchs, they came over to the king and they said, you know that guy that you wanted to that you honored the other day? Haman built a gallows to kill him. And it's not just a gallows, it's 50 It's over 50 feet high. It's a skyscraper gallows to make an example. So it's all of these adding on top of each other. He made a plan to kill the wife. And then in the house, his actions looked like he was trying to either hurt Esther or rape her. And then the person whom the king honored, just honored, he wants to kill him. All of these things building up, the king says, that gallows he built for Haman, that gallows that Haman built for Mordecai, hang Haman on it. And so they took Haman and they hung him on it. That which Haman built for the destruction of others, it was his own destruction. His pride was his own undoing. And after Haman was killed, the king finally quieted down. And he noticed, he gave Esther authority over what to do over the house of Haman. So he let Esther decide what he's going to do with all his kids, with all his family, with his relatives. If she wanted to kill them off, she had the authority to do so. She could have done it with a snap of the finger, but she did not do it. And based off of what Esther said, the king took off the ring of authority that was on Haman and gave it to Mordecai. So Mordecai is now in the position where Haman was, going from a low-level politician to now being like high-level politician. He is in the circle of the Supreme Court, you can say. And Esther, instead of what she did, she delegated the authority of what to deal with Haman, his entire household. She gave that over to Mordecai. Mordecai also does not take revenge. Esther could have wiped them all off. She doesn't do it. Mordecai, he has the power to wipe them all off from the face of the earth. He doesn't do it. Instead, what happens is Esther, she falls before the king and she says, is there any way to revert? She comes to the king, again, uninvited. He holds out the scepter. And she says, this is now like possibly the next day. She says, is there any way to reverse this? Please, if I found favor, please reverse it, for I cannot bear to see my people destroyed. And the king tells her, whatever is written in the law of the Medes and Persians, and what's sealed with the ring, it cannot be revoked. It cannot be changed. Even I, the king, cannot change it. But I give you my ring. You're willing to add whatever you wish that doesn't contradict that into law. Go ahead and do whatever you wish. And so Mordecai, he adds to it. He comes up with an idea and a plan saying, all right, well, if we can't remove the destruction, let's at least write in that we could defend against ourselves. That day of destruction will exist, but we will have the right and the authority to build up an army. They want to mess with us. Let's be prepared. And so he's saying the Jews then, anyone who attacks them or anyone who looks like they want to attack them, they have the right to kill them on that day. So and it will be like self-defense. Anyone who approaches them with a weapon, they have a right to get rid of them. And that will happen on the same day. And he says, it doesn't matter if they're a kid, a woman, doesn't matter who they are. They approach them with a weapon, they have the right to kill. And so they wrote that, send it off everywhere in the language of the people and also in Hebrew. Now, the Hebrew part is important because he wanted all the Jews to definitely read it. If they don't know the language there, they can at least read the edict or the law now in Hebrew. And it was sent all over the place. And so Mordecai started growing higher and greater. And people started fearing Mordecai. He started getting so strong. And people also started fearing the Jews. And what's interesting, the Jews started rising up in joy and honor. And people who weren't Jewish started pretending to be Jewish. They're saying, now the Jews can defend themselves. Let's pretend we're Jews so that they don't touch us. There was so much fear all around throughout the different, you can say, provinces or the countries within the empire, that people started, you say, immigrating or assimilating, taking on. They say, we want to be Jewish just to be safe. So imagine their army now consists of not only the Jews, but those who are not Jewish, who are afraid of the Jews, and who are joining the Jewish cause. And it happened that when the day came to be carried out, the Jews prevailed. Their armies prevailed. No one can stand against them. And what's also, all of the officials, all of the entire king's court, they're helping out the Jews as well. They had such an advantage. I imagine supplying weapons. I imagine supplying armor so that these Jews, they are ready. So they had the help of the court. And Mordecai, he grew stronger and stronger in terms of authority. And a lot of they wanted to help because they were afraid of Mordecai. And it was in this city alone, they killed 500 people. And within that group, the 10 sons of Haman died. So this tells us that these sons of Haman, his 10 kids, they took up weapons. They wanted to get revenge against the Jews, and all of them died in the process. And what is beautiful is on this day of destruction, in the law that Mordecai wrote, he said, anyone we kill, the Jews have the right to take from them. Whatever that person owns that they kill, they can take. But no one took anything from those that they killed. The Jews did not plunder anything. And all throughout, they told Queen Esther, 500 people were destroyed, and also the 10 sons of Haman, just so you know. They also got rid of them. Now, Esther says, she comes to the king, and she asks, now, the sons of Haman are already killed. We didn't kill him. We didn't kill we didn't specifically wipe him out. They're in the process. They died. They wanted revenge. They got killed. could we take those 10 sons now that are dead and hang them with Haman, who's already hanging there? Can we add him onto the gallows for display? And the king says, go for it. Do so. And she also asks, can we also use this city? Can we also extend this for one more day? And the king says, go for it. And so the next day, 300 people were killed, but no one took anything. And on top of that, if we can even add to it, throughout the entire kingdom, 75,000 people who did not like the Jews rose up armed and tried to kill some of the Jews, and 75,000 of them were killed. And throughout the entire kingdom, not a single Jew, even though they have the right to, they didn't take anything from those that they killed. They had a moral standard. And so a celebration was made for all those, for this day. It was a day of celebration. And of course, if something great and momentous happens, it's good to celebrate it. It was a joy. They feasted, they had parties, it was a holiday. And so Mordecai then wrote as a law that people should, on the 13th day, so on the 14th day, so the day afterward, on the 14th day, and on the 15th day, that they would celebrate by rejoicing, food, giving gifts to one another and to the poor. And so they accepted this. It was passed. It went into the culture. And they decided to call this celebration Purim. And it comes from the word pur, which means to cast lots, because the day on which it would happen happened with the throwing of dice, of throwing of dots, of the lots. So it's whether this holiday is still celebrated, I'm not sure. It's possible that some still celebrate it. Purim. And they said, let it happen continually going forward. And Esther, she let Mordecai deal with it, how it's going to happen. He sent it out, and it was established. National holiday. The king also decided to create taxes all over the place, and it's Mordecai, he became second to the emperor. Similar to how Joseph became the second ruler, Mordecai became the second ruler. It was as if he was emperor. He was just below the emperor. But he could act, he could move, he could govern. And it was a practice during this time where you had the emperor, and under that you had governors or kings, as they were sometimes called. And they would govern these areas. So just as we read that there were 7 princes under him, and there were there were 127 provinces. So regions would have kings. And according to history, Darius, during the time of Daniel, or that we read in the book of Daniel, he is believed to be one of these kings or governors. And they had the right and authority to act like the emperor within that domain. They were still under the main emperor, but within their domain, they could act like the emperor, like a king. And Mordecai was like one of those. He had the right to act as he wished, as a king, as a ruler, in the domain where he was at. He was just under Ahasuerus or Artaxerxes. Now, what is interesting is when we read the book of Nehemiah, one of the people who goes back to Jerusalem after the 70 years are completed. So if you remember history, King Cyrus, he writes a decree that allows the Jews, after 70 years, he writes a law saying the Jews can now go back to their homeland. That was Cyrus. So after Cyrus, you had a few other kings. I think Ahasuerus was maybe second or third in line. But you had Ahasuerus. And then after him, there was Artaxerxes. Now, whether the Artaxerxes of Nehemiah is Esther's husband or whether he is the son of Ahasuerus, in other words, one of those, I'm not exactly sure, but it's one of those. And it's likely that Esther had an influence in getting and allowing the Jews to go back to rebuild the walls and rebuild the temple. And one of the people who came with Nehemiah. So you had several groups of people. There was the edict that they could return. Then there was Ezra, where he came down first, and he came to rebuild the temple. So he had permission to do so from the king. And then you also had, Ezra, he got the permission from Cyrus. And then here you have Nehemiah. After the temple was built, or is it in the process of being built still? Nehemiah got permission from Artaxerxes to come down and rebuild the temples because they were constantly getting attacked by those around. And Mordecai is one of the people who came back to Jerusalem with Nehemiah. Outside of Nehemiah and Esther, we do not encounter either Esther or Mordecai anymore. But it's just an interesting side note. Mordecai eventually left his post as the governor, as you can say, a ruler in the province, to come back to Jerusalem, to come back to his homeland. It's a happy ending for Mordecai and a happy ending for the story. And with that, let's pray. Lord, I thank you that you allow us to delve more deeper into the story. There were a lot of things that I found new when I was studying it again, and I'm sure that others found interesting. And we thank you that you have such a story. It seems like a fairy tale, almost too good to be true. But it's in there, Lord. We thank you for this one-of-a-kind story that is, with the way it is, it could be made into a Disney film with great literary story. We thank you that it exists and that you created such a thing, Lord. And we ask, Lord, that if you put us in the positions where we are at for such a time, help us to recognize that time and to be ready to act. May you be glorified through all that we do, Lord. Use us. In Jesus' name, amen.